Welcome to the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Here we provide tips, tools, and resources to help law enforcement officers succeed at work and in life. I'm your host, Michael McIntosh, retired sheriff and current bureau chief in the Denver metro area. In today's episode, I'm talking with Crystal McCoy, who served as a police officer for 17 years before transitioning to a career in the federal service. She has held various roles, including officer, detective, sergeant, task force officer, and public information officer, working under multiple chiefs of police. Her experiences provide valuable insight on navigating the profound impacts of ineffective leadership. Well, Crystal, a lot of times through the course of a career, we have the advantage of having great leadership, and we also have the disadvantage of having ineffective leadership. And I know that if you spend any time in law enforcement, you're going to run across both of those scenarios. I think that one of the most difficult things to do when you have ineffective leadership is really know how to navigate your career so that you can continue in law enforcement and it's not something that destroys your career, because I've seen it happen to so many people. Having been in law enforcement, and I know that you've navigated through some ineffective leadership through your career. What are some of the things that you did to navigate that? And I'm sure that as you first started to do that, maybe they didn't work and maybe they weren't the best. But what would you tell those that are in law enforcement, those that are either new in their career or they're actually struggling right now, working for an ineffective leader? What advice could you give about navigating through that?
Yeah, I try to take for a new officer, someone entering kind of new into the culture and the job and all of the challenges with it. I can't reinforce enough the importance for a new officer, especially, to really just be an observer for a period of time and seek out those people in the organization that are mimicking something you want to be. You see their success. You see how they communicate. You see how they navigate some things that you think are tricky. It's very important to observe that and then try to, get their ear every once in a while and talk to them, get to know them, and, find a really good mentor, and maybe that person you're observing can become your mentor. For the people who've been in the career for a while, I think we have a more difficult time because we can get a little jaded. We can get sucked into the negativity. It often is all around you, and so you need to evaluate your circle. It's as simple as surround yourself with good people. If everyone in your circle is constantly having a bad day, feeling negative, gossiping, and all of that sort of stuff, you need to, and I've had to do this myself, take a big step back and out of that circle and observe what's going on, because sometimes I feel like in my experience, I felt like that was my whole world, that negativity, like it was the biggest thing happening ever. Then you go on vacation and you realize that's the smallest thing happening ever. So you need to get away from the circle and just do what we do on a scene. The OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act, right? And I feel like you can approach, no matter what level you're at, you can approach any situation, including the inside of the organization, that way.
One of the things that you talked about is to be an observer. And I think that is such a critical key component to being able to walk through something like that. Because I think when you start to get caught up in all of that negativity that might be going on, which is a result of the ineffective leadership, you start to lose that focus, and you can really start to follow people or even sometimes lead people in a direction that we probably shouldn't be going, instead of taking the time to step back to observe what's really going on, and then approach it from a standpoint of coming up with a plan. How are we going to attack that? As you've walked through that, what have you done to start getting yourself out of that spiral? Because I know that when you're on a team, teams become very, very close, and whether that team projects a lot of positivity or whether that team projects a lot of negativity, a lot of times many members of that team are involved in that. And how do you one, get yourself out of it, but then how do you encourage and try to change the trajectory of the team and what they're doing?
I think taking that big step back is the first step, and having sort of that operational plan of your career in mind and knowing what is going to be your guardrails, what drives you in this career, what guides you in your personal values in your life. You need to always lean into those when you are in areas of uncertainty with it, leadership, difficult choices of making where to promote or not to promote. Is it the right time? I think you have to have those things in place. But the biggest thing I did, and maybe the most unpopular, I think sometimes it makes you come across like you're isolating yourself from the team, right? Because the culture is huge. But I had to take a very big and intentional step back off the horizon, because
Right.
the horizon. I've had a lot of supervisors tell me that you do a good job, you put yourself on the horizon, and you're a target, right, for other people who may have an axe to grind with you, or you're getting in the way of their career path. So take a big step back, and then I think what you'll see pretty quickly when you do that, you'll get some clarity. You'll start to see sometimes motives and that are not going to align with the kind of person that you are, and you can see what they're doing. You can strategize a little bit with your own path moving forward. And then I also saw that I stopped becoming a part of the negativity, and I started experiencing a little peace with that clarity. Less people were coming to me and sucking me into those, because the nonverbal cue was I'm just not participating anymore. And then other people were like that, who were way more mature than me at those early moments in time, would come to me. And then I was surrounding myself with good people. That's what I noticed. That you attract what you put out. And if you stop putting out the negativity, stop putting out that you're in this negative cycle, and you start putting out a little bit of maturity, a little bit of strategy, the right people will come to you, and then you only grow from that point.
Right. I've seen examples, and in fact have been in early on in my career. I can remember working on a patrol team, and really, unfortunately, the supervisor at the time was very, very ineffective. And as you work on the road for 3 or 4 years, you come to know what effective leadership looks like and what ineffective leadership looks like, even at your first line level supervision. And I can tell you that drove me to start looking at other agencies. Is there a time when you need to get out of one organization just because it's so negative, or maybe even worse, there's a lack of integrity in the ranks of the leadership?
Yeah, it's hard for a new officer to really be able to assess and orient themselves. And sometimes when you're trying to become a cop, you're going to take any job, the first one that makes that phone call to you. And I would just really encourage them, the new officers particularly, to do ride-alongs. Do research, get to know someone in the organization, and just kind of know like what the challenges are in the organization, and understand if that's something that you can tolerate and navigate. Is it something that's so misaligned with who you are? And that's where I always struggled, when the morals and the characters and the values of the organization, the leadership of the organization were so opposite of me. That's where I struggle. And so I would say look into study the organization as much as you possibly can to make sure that you can tolerate that environment, or at least have a plan of how you're going to navigate that, because I think timing is really important in your career. You get hired and you see, I think the biggest mistakes that I ever made was taking opportunities too soon. There were doors open for me that kind of had, it aligned me with the wrong people, and I was just excited, right? But I wasn't looking. I wasn't looking into the future. I wasn't looking into the impact or the perception of things, and that really matters in law enforcement culture. Promote too soon without good, solid relationships and reputation in place, that could really be detrimental to you for the rest of your career. It's very unforgiving, right? I mean, reputation and perception is very unforgiving.
I have actually had conversations with folks in my role in leadership about, something that somebody did 10, 12 years ago, and we're horrible in law enforcement about continuing to. So let's look at what that person did 10, 12 years ago, and let's look at the growth that they've had, and let's not hold that against them anymore. Yeah. This is something that we need to let go of. But you're absolutely right. That whatever it is can stay. That becomes part of your reputation, and it stays with you through your law enforcement career, especially if you remain in one specific agency, right? If you're not moving around, if you don't go to another agency, sometimes that you can't shake that reputation. And that whole moving into a position too quickly, I see that happen quite often. It's funny because, when you've been in law enforcement for as long as we have, you really have an opportunity to look back, and you really realize that this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And truly, 1 or 2 years, it's not that big a deal to wait for a couple of years, wait for that opportunity to present itself again, and then move into it when you have prepared for that, as opposed to jumping into something too soon. Because I think you make a great point. It can really, really change the direction that your career might go. And reputation, respect, it's critical in leadership in law enforcement. And that is something that typically comes from those that would be working for you. That's where you want to have that reputation or that respect. You certainly don't want to be working in a role where those that are working with you or working for you really don't respect you and think that you were given a gift, or the old term that we used to, the golden boy or the golden child, or the teacher's pet.
Yep.
Those are very difficult to overcome if you get labeled with one of those. And we are certainly, unfortunately, at times very unforgiving in law enforcement when it comes to that in leadership. As you're working for an ineffective leader, where do you personally need to kind of keep your focus, and how do you either lead up or lead across, or make sure that and you kind of talked about it, taking yourself out of some of the things that are the result of ineffective leadership, but how do you navigate that then and start moving in the positive, and really, as much as you can, even though they're an ineffective leader, how do we get as much out of them as we can for the betterment of ourselves and the betterment of the team that we're on?
Yeah, I think I would describe I was feeling like I was in self-preservation mode at one point where I took that big step back because I didn't know what to do, and it's okay to retreat, right? So I retreated out of the situation, and I had to really get strategic and tactical about my next moves. Not only strategic and tactical with, how am I going to stay off of the radar of the person that that I don't want to be a victim of, so to speak, right? Or maybe even too deeply associated with because of their reputation they can't shake. But I've seen a lot of people recently having this like, have I reached the most potential in this organization? Has my reputation from 10 years ago that I can't shake, is it preventing me from getting beyond lieutenant and up the chain? And they're faced with that decision. Is it time to go? Is it time to laterally move over into a different sort of unit? Is that happiness for me? Is that meeting that long-term goal? Because that operational plan for your career, you should do it early on, check it annually, and make sure that you are still heading in the right direction you want, so you don't get lost in the weeds of the mess and the culture and all of that stuff. So you're going to be confronted with some situations, but just go back to what you lean into, what's important to you. Is this good for your family? Is this good for your mental health? Call that mentor. Call the retirees. Retirees are great. I mean, I know they can be a little disgruntled sometimes if you catch them, having a good time and a couple beers, but they actually really do enjoy taking that mentorship role. And they will give you really good sound and sage advice. Sometimes if you just reach out to them and say, what do I do? There's no better advisor than a retiree sometimes. They've seen it all, right? I mean, they've seen it all. So call them and ask them. But navigating, you're gonna be faced with a tough decision. Should I take a step back? I've got 15 years ahead of me. So let's just take a step back. Let's go back to patrol. Let's, promote perhaps if that moves you away from the environment. But treat it like a tactical operation. How do I tactically get through this with all my limbs intact, and make a safe move that keeps relationships in the good place? And I know we think a lot about, well, I can do the job I deserve. I've done a good job. I deserve this promotion. Perhaps you are great for it on paper, but what is more important, as you mentioned, is perception, and the perception that you've earned it among your peers more so than your sergeants or anybody else. You've got to earn that because one day you might be leading them,
right?
Which is important because they need to respect you in order for you to be an effective leader.
Yeah. You mentioned two things that I want to touch on a little bit, and one of those was you said annually review your plan. Tell me a little bit more about that. You have sat down and come up with, this is my career plan, and then you go back and you readjust that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I know this probably seems difficult for a brand new officer. I've heard very few people, brand new officers, say, and some agencies will ask us, where do you see yourself in 5 years, right? That question. And then not a lot of people say, I'm going to be chief of police one day, right? So maybe do a short-term and a long-term understanding. This is a fluid situation, and it's a long-term marathon situation. So, what is your goal going in? Never forget your motivation. I used to carry a piece of paper on me. And I wish I could remember what it said, but it was early on, and something struck me that was important. And I was like, I need to remember this every day. And I stuck it right there in front of my odometer in my patrol car. And it was my balance when I started getting negative. So, maybe if the long term's too difficult, just do a 5-year plan, right? What do I hope to do? Do I hope to at least become a detective within 5 years? Great. What training am I going to set myself up for? Who am I going to seek out as a mentor? What sort of I'm trying to think of not internships, but what sort of opportunities do I have to go sit in and observe these units for a while? And then you get to the 3-year mark and you're like, I don't want to be a detective. Great. What did you decide in those 3 years? What did you learn you love? And then just adjust it. But I think it's important to have at least a plan to remind you why you began in the first place, remind you, which is always important to remember because the negativity can kind of drown that out sometimes. And then just continually adjust, but keep it's so important to keep in mind that you are earning it and building positive relationships along the way with your peers.
Yeah. And then you just mentioned the other one again, and that's find a mentor. And sometimes that's one, sometimes that's several that you're wanting to emulate. But talk to me about what that looks like for you.
I think as a female officer, something that might be unique to a female, it was I sought out a female officer very early on that was already in a position of leadership. More so because I was like trying to find my identity as a cop. Like, what kind of a cop am I going to be? Am I going to be like someone who is just very, polite and kind and just, uses your verbal skills a lot? Or am I going to be kind of hard-nosed? Because you're a woman amongst a lot of men, you're trying to figure out how are you going to be respected by your peers? Right. How are you going to effectively handle it? So I had a couple mentors. I had the female mentor. I learned early on I wanted to do intel work. I submerged myself with mentors that I encountered that really exposed me to something that I decided. So for me, it was a guy over in kayak when I caught this case that kayak got involved and helped me, and I was like, oh, that was it. I got the bug big time. So that guy, whether he liked it or not, he was on my speed dial, and I got it. But through him, I got a lot of experience. I got to work with kayak. I got my security clearance. I got to do a lot of intel work. So that was an example of I probably had no idea what I wanted to do when I became a cop, but that I found a path pretty early, and I went after that path.
Which is important, and I think that there are so many that come into law enforcement because they really don't know. I mean, they've heard, they had a friend that was one, they've done a ride-along, but when they get in, they don't really know, to use the phrase, what I want to do when I grow up. And it's interesting that you talk about your path seemed to be going in one direction, but after 3 or 4 years of experience, it went in another. And I think that's also a key component of being of being successful in law enforcement is understanding that you have to be flexible because things can change. Your boss can change at the very top of an organization. Your boss will probably definitely change depending upon what assignment you are. You come in one day and your sergeant is Sergeant Davis, and then the next day it's Sergeant Smith. You just don't know what kind of changes are going to take place as you are in this career, and you have to be flexible. And that's why I think it's so important to go back and look at that plan. I think it's important to have a plan, but it's also okay to come in law enforcement and, to your point, not know that you want to be the CEO of an organization someday.
Yeah.
Myself is a perfect example. I never saw myself in that type of position. But as the longer that I was in law enforcement, the more that I started to understand and fill leadership roles, that passion and that desire started to really kind of grab hold of me and led me to be able to have some of the assignments that I've had in law enforcement. But I think that mentorship piece is so critically important.
Yeah.
And I've had mentors that they didn't even know that they were a mentor of mine, and it's just being able to watch from a distance, or it may be somebody that's even in a completely different line of work that is an author, or I mean I've got a John Maxwell book right there, right? And when it comes to some of the leadership principles, I think he's spot on some of those things, and it's a place that I will go at times. So I think it's important to be able to have a lot of different folks doing different things that we want to emulate, not just in our professional life, but in our personal life, because that's going to be a direct carryover. How do I, as a law enforcement officer, carry myself in my personal life?
Yeah.
When it comes to family, when it comes to faith, when it comes to hobbies, when it comes to, did you along the way find mentors, not just for your professional life, but also for your personal life as a police officer?
Yeah, I grew up in a just so you can understand how I grew into that, I suppose, is, I grew up in foster care. I had a very traumatic childhood, so I didn't have a lot of role models. So this is probably where I kind of naturally observe. And so getting into law enforcement felt like family, and I think we all feel that, right?
Yeah.
And you can kind of really get sucked into some things where you're like, whoa, wait a minute, how did I get down here? This is not making me feel good about myself. I wouldn't brag about that. I would not like to see that in a headline, and you have to think about it. But I grew into I got mature, and I started taking a look at people whose, especially the personal lives, really started to kind of rub me the wrong way when people were making some very bad decisions with their personal life. I was like, I can't be associated with that. I have been the victim of someone else's reputation many times as a female. If there's someone in the organization who has a reputation for having affairs with women in the department and stuff, I couldn't be friends with them.
Right.
Because I was seen as, oh, we know him,
Yeah.
sort of thing. So I had to be cautious about that. Later in my career, I really when I was really struggling with leadership, and it was really up against my morals and my character and things that I believed, I got back into church, and I refound my base there. And I was like, okay, so some things was like, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm not wrong, and some things really gave me some guiding principles that I needed at the moment. So even if it's not faith, it's that mentor. Like, call that mentor and like, what do I do? Why am I feeling this way? How do I get around this? And hopefully they'll say something like, take a step back.
Yeah.
Breathe, relax. Let's get down to stop looking at all the symptoms. Let's get down to the cause and figure out what that is really your angst, and move forward. Protect your peace as much as you possibly can. And if you don't feel good about it, you're never going to regret saying no. You're never going to regret moving yourself away from something that you don't feel good about, and especially if it's bleeding into your personal life and your personal relationships and it's causing you to isolate. Because I found I tended to isolate when I felt unsafe. And leadership would often make me feel unsafe. And, when they're unpredictable and they appear to be leading with motives rather than with integrity, that made me feel unsafe, made me retreat, made me question myself, made me self-isolate. So what did I do? Go to the mentors, go to church, read a book, someone that you trust or something that you trust. I wish a lot of people exercise, right? Like they exercise their way through it. That's fantastic too. So you know yourself, know what you need to do to get through things in a healthy way. And don't, I see a lot of people kind of get bogged down by the negativity so much they can't get out of it. They don't have that escape or that healthy way out of it. And then they become so angry and they're miserable, right? And they burn all relationships. And the saddest thing I see is 20-year careers end in some sort of demise where when they step away from the job, they have no friends. No relationships back there. And then I'm just like, oh, that's so sad. You did so much good work, but that mental health piece, that negativity just really sucked the best part of law enforcement out of it. Yeah. The relationships. Right.
Right. Yeah. And you do see a lot of people, unfortunately, that leave bitter. Yeah. And that is not a place that you want to be. And there are truly things that you can do to make sure that a career, you're going to have your ups and downs. There's going to be hard days. There's going to be hard months, maybe even hard years. But there's also going to be you had mentioned it a couple of times, going back to the why. Why did I get into this? Why was I passionate about law enforcement? Why is it that I wanted to do this job? And going back to that. And through the ups and downs, we have to go back to making sure that we're taking care of ourselves. And there are ways that we can do that. And I think that you've said it so well. A lot of times we just need to take a tactical pause, take a look at the situation. I never really looked at it from a tactical perspective, but when you were talking, I'm thinking, we take tactical pauses, and we have that opportunity and that ability. We don't have to solve everything immediately. There are times that we should just reset.
Yeah.
And look at what's really going on. Take that great overview look of where we're at. Figure out where we want to go and how it is that we're going to get there again. In law enforcement, especially on the street, there are obviously times where we have to react, and we have to react immediately. But so many times we should, and we do have the opportunity to take that tactical pause and to reassess what's going on. Nobody's life is in danger.
Right.
Nobody's going to get hurt. Those are the times where we can truly just say, let's stop. Let's bring some more thoughts, some more ideas. Let's bring some mentorship into this. Let's take some time to really reflect on where it is that we're at and where it is that we need to go. We've talked a little bit about what it looks like to walk through some of these processes. What would you say are the consequences if we don't take that time?
Just kind of keeping with the same analogy, what's the consequences when you don't have a tactically sound operation, right? Somebody's getting hurt. There's going to be a casualty along the way, and you don't want to look back at an unnecessary casualty. You failed to you got trapped in that tunnel vision a little bit. Maybe you didn't take that step back. The consequences. It's always been my experience, and I've seen it. I personally made the wrong decisions, and these are the ones you never forget, these lessons, right, when you make the wrong decision. But the consequence is that if you don't take care to make a plan and have a blueprint and keep evaluating your tactical plan in your career, you are going to find yourself in a hole you can't get out of, potentially. And then everything's derailed. You originally, you've got this plan 10 years out now that's like, I'm going to become a lieutenant. And you've taken some really bad steps along the way that were preventable. And you're never going to get there for one reason or another, right? You've aligned yourself with the wrong people because, again, earning yourself through your career, I think, is probably one of the most underestimated things early on that an officer needs to understand. I think a lot of us go into a job going, well, if I write 50 tickets every month and I, save a life and I do all these great things on paper, I'm going to be the chief one day. What will wipe out all that good work is one misconception, one miscommunication, one bad, reckless decision. Whether that's tactical or if that's on a relationship level, if you treat people poorly as you move through that, if you don't think, I've got 20 years, I can wait 3 more years to become a sergeant. If you don't think about that and at least evaluate that, I see it in every situation that comes to mind, myself included, that you can't get out of those holes sometimes. And then you have to do what? You're not stepping back anymore. You're stepping out. You have to get out of that situation you're in to get a fresh slate somewhere or somehow else.
So if you were to give 3 takeaways when it comes to finding yourself in one of those situations, ineffective leadership, and maybe it's causing great negativity within yourself and within the team that you're working on. What are the 3 or 4 takeaways that you would say are must to get yourself out of that situation?
I had someone give me such a good analogy one time. They said, you remember Mario and Super Mario Brothers, that he would run up against the wall and he'd just keep hitting his head on the wall, and then you realized you could just walk around it? He was like, stop banging your head on the wall. And you stop banging your head on the wall by, number 1, stepping out of it. Number 2, that OODA loop thing again, but that's your mentor, right? Your mentor, your trusted person, whatever you lean into to help you make good decisions for yourself. And then you just make the next move that's best for you. And that could be a lot of things, right? So in my situation, it was very important for me to step out of that. It was just like you could, it was palpable how negative it was, to get away from it, to calm myself and my mind, to get out of that fatal funnel, so to speak, of things, get out of it, look at it. And I had to make a decision. And my decision was really like, this is never going to work for me. So I'm going to have to, like this, I've done everything I want to do. I have a different opportunity somewhere else. And for me, it was leaving the organization. I could have had other options. I could have decided to promote, but to be honest with you, my path, promotion was not on it for me. I didn't want it. I did it, been there, done that. Not good at it, didn't like it, and recognizing that is not my strength, and it didn't bring me happiness, didn't make me feel successful, was so important for me, because I was like, promotion is just not what I'm looking for. So other, that's what the top things I did, and the things that I don't regret is I got myself out of it. I sought some mentorship from people, and I made the decision that was right for protecting my peace and my happiness, and really, you may regret a lot of things in your life, personally and professionally, but you will never regret putting yourself and your family first. And that's really what that decision came down to me. Like, am I the best mom? Do I feel good about me? Am I giving my friendships and my relationships and other things that really matter to me, are they getting the best of me? Am I prioritizing them right? And I was not. And that's probably why I had so much problems. Like, my priorities were way out of whack. I had the job up here and family down there. Right. I was putting too much energy into here. And I changed all of that, and I am just a different person inside and out, to be honest with you.
And that's great. And it's really hard. And I find that it's really hard with type A personalities, which typically most law enforcement officers are, to not put the job first.
Yeah.
Those types of personalities and those that are successful in law enforcement, they are typically ones who want to be really good at what it is that they do in law enforcement. And there's all kinds of different jobs in law enforcement, but they just want to be really good at that. And unfortunately, I would even say most of the time, being really good at that job in our minds means that we have to put the job number 1 above everything else. And there are, I believe, the ones that become successful, not just at the job but in life, are the ones that at some point come to that realization that the job is critically important. The role that we fulfill in our communities, if we're doing it right, it's critically important. And we really need great law enforcement out there serving our community and keeping people safe. But you can do that and also make sure that your family, that yourself and your family come before the job. Because if you're not healthy, whether that's mentally, spiritually, physically, if you're not healthy, you can't put the best version of yourself into that role that you've been asked to fulfill in the law enforcement community.
I was going to say, like, I would argue that you will be a better cop if your priorities are in order.
Yep.
Versus having that at the top. It's the most critical, most important thing in your entire life is the job. You're going to find yourself very stressed out and anxious and disappointed, honestly, because you can't fix everything. As much as many of us are control freaks, you can't fix everything. But you can guide things and you can be helpful and you can be some peace and help in a moment in time. I feel like totally do it better when my priorities are in order, because you just have a different perspective on life and problems and how you approach things when your priorities are in order.
Right. Yeah. You couldn't have said it better. Any specific resources that you utilize or that you would think would be important for those that might be in that situation right now where they're really struggling because of ineffective leadership and they really don't know which way to turn? Have you found resources out there that are helpful?
Mentors. I mean, I feel like I'm saying that a lot, but I really leaned into some higher level, like retirees, ones that really worked at that, where I was experiencing leadership was pretty high in the organization. And so I reached out to people that I was fortunate to have relationships with that were out of the game, that operated at those levels to help me understand and kind of just make a good decision, really. So I leaned into that. I didn't go into reading a lot of leadership books. I got a lot of that along the way. I experienced it along the way. But the tough decision was really the impact it was going to have on my family. So I would just, if you're in that situation right now, you need to care for your mental health immediately. That needs to be at the very top of your list is you. And I know that we don't want to do that, right? That we're not the most important. We're fine.
Right.
We're okay. No, you need to do what it takes to care for your mental health because very quickly it will erode that and put you into just a downward spiral. So mental health, talk to a therapist. I talked to a therapist many portions of my career, and I talk to them at this point in time. And I call them up, and I'm like, just keep me in line, because I found that I was really a lot of times just coming down on myself unnecessarily. Like, why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this? And it's not you, right? So someone to balance you. And, if reading is your thing, I love podcasts. There's so many like this podcast, listening to other people who have been through it and their pieces of advice. And then I do a lot of just observing people, so Mike was very successful through and through. What did he do? Maybe I'm calling you, right? Right. What do I do with this? So that's my top thing is protect your peace and your sanity. Talk to good, healthy people outside of the circle of the problem. And whatever that outlet is, if it's writing, it's exercising, it's, digging deeper into your faith or whatever it is, submerge yourself in positive people and in a positive environment.
Well, I appreciate our time and just the opportunity to be able to talk about this. And it's a reality in a lot of organizations, not just in law enforcement. It's a reality in a lot of different organizations, but it's definitely a reality in law enforcement. And it doesn't matter if the agency's big. It doesn't matter if the agency's small. Unfortunately, there are people in positions that are ineffective doing what it is that they're doing. And it doesn't have to mean the end of your career. And I think that just our conversation today is really reaffirming that it doesn't have to be the end of your career, that it's something that is you're going to experience in law enforcement. We all have, all of us will. It's not just you. It's really something that is out there in organizations. It's a culture, and from from our perspective, we do everything that we can to try to avoid those things from happening, but unfortunately it does happen. I think that there was some real great sound advice that you gave, and I just appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks. That's all for this week's episode of the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. We invite you to visit our website at leleaders.com for our free guide, 10 questions to consider before putting in for your next promotion. Until next time, stay safe and remember, you have the power to make a difference. Thank you for your commitment to law enforcement. We're honored to be a part of your journey to success. Let's elevate our call to service together.